Hello, my name is Buki Fatona. I am a doctoral researcher at the University of Oxford. Welcome to Phil-Sci-Theo, an 8-part discussion series on topics in the intersect of philosophy of science and religion. So as a priest and an academic who works primarily in the sciences, how do you navigate any tensions between science and religion?
I guess that for myself, I don't see tensions, or if there are tensions, they're productive tensions. They're tensions that inform. If you know, that if we wrestle with them, if I wrestle with them, they help to deepen both my kind of scholarly perspectives as well as my theological and my faith perspective. So for me, tensions are a positive. But I'm aware of tensions, amongst the people that I mix with, the students that I mix with, and the congregations and people that I mix with on that Christian level. For students, we've talked a lot about how there is this false distinction between meaning and knowledge within that Western story of science, kind of critiquing and replacing that story. That's what we do in science and technology studies. I don't do that because I'm a priest. I do that because that's what we do in science and technology studies. I guess perhaps in my teaching, I'm aware that that science and technology studies is itself a social science. So it kind of shares the heritage of believing that it's possible to give this objective description of something, in this case, science, rather than science gives an objective description of nature, and that we are part of that. There are many methodologies within science and technology studies that are kind of critiquing that subject-object distinction at the moment. So we've referenced decolonial ones already. Queer studies is another one that is very much kind of breaking down that false distinction between me and the things that I study. So I'm doing the same work as my colleagues. I guess perhaps in my interactions with students, sometimes I'm encouraging them very, very gently to dig down into the emotional layers of what matters to them personally. Which I guess you could call that spiritual if you wanted. But I don't think I'm unique, within my department or my discipline in doing that. I think most good teachers do that. They want their students to connect on some, real level. They want education to be life-changing as well as CV changing.
Yes.
Amongst Christian audiences, uh, I'm repeatedly reminded of the fact that although my field has kind of got over the alleged clash between science and religion, there are an awful lot of people in the world who are still stuck with that.
Yes.
And it's a challenge sometimes to be, oh, that's an interesting and important question. Like, oh,
Yes.
for goodness sake, if you studied what I studied, you wouldn't.
Yes.
But you have to be respectful of that, because it does bother people. And in a quick conversation, you don't have time to unpack it. So the quickest way of navigating that tension is just to say, well, did you know that in the history of science, most of the quote unquote great scientists were very pious people, and they saw those two activities as entirely complementary, and that's the best one sentence answer, I think. I might direct them towards either Ron Number's book Galileo Goes to Jail,
Yes.
or Thomas Dixon's very short introduction to religion and science. I think both of those are really good. that's that's probably the best kind of quick way of dealing with it. I don't have time to sort of unpack the whole here's the problems in defining science, and here's what we think it does, but philosophers demonstrate that it doesn't. There's not time for that. Which is a which is a sadness, and I guess it matters when we get to the ecological crisis and people are still stuck on, right, well, we need a rational and a scientific solution to this.
Yes.
Rational in terms of governance, scientific in terms of, perhaps we can figure out technologies that will save us. And it won't, until we bring meaning and value and spirituality back into that conversation, we're not ever going to be in a position. So sometimes I'm dismayed at the work that is still to be done in terms of reconciling science and religion. I think, I guess that doing that by taking everyone through a course in science and technology studies is A, not practical, and B, actually maybe it's just a question of getting stuck in and going right back to the beginning of the conversation. I think that there are moves afoot in popular science, popular culture, that are rewiring the way we position ourselves in nature, and in doing so are quietly rewiring the ways that we think about science and religion. So I think perhaps that's the more direct route, and that is, obviously the route that we need for this incredibly precarious historical moment. So bit of a sort of a somber note to end on, perhaps, but that's where we are. We can't afford the luxury of sort of abstract philosophical conversations as we could 50 years ago.
So far, we've spoken about science and religion, and it would be good, because some of your work is in technology in addition to science, to talk more about how science and technology interact, and particularly on the internet and in AI studies. So if you could say a bit more about that, that would be great.
Yeah, technologies of religion is a really growing area at the moment in science and technology studies and in anthropology. People working on these questions. We've always had new technologies for which we've put to religious purposes. The printing press,
Yes.
one of the first things that was printed was the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Radio, television, all of these things. Steam printing, right? The birth of religious tracts,
Yes.
religious tract societies in the early 19th century. And all of these have both, I guess, facilitated trends that were already underway, but have also kind of the affordances of each technology are unique and kind of permit and encourage different forms of religious expression and practice. I mean, for me, I see a lot of this tech stuff, this kind of Silicon Valley stuff, as actually encouraging a very unhelpful Christian theology, which is a very sharp distinction between the material and the spiritual, or the material and the digital, as we would say for this. We have this kind of belief that almost, things that are on a screen are not real, or they're in a different sphere. They're not. They're absolutely material. They're hugely energy consumptive, for one thing. They rely on the work of underpaid and exploited and often traumatized laborers to go through the sifting of unpleasant material. So if we look at the creation of ChatGPT, we know that there were Kenyan workers who had to physically filter out the nastiness of what was in that big web archive that was then being used to create the answers that we have today. That's the reason why you don't get generally racism or pornography or hatred or whatever. There were actual people who filtered that out. So the digital is absolutely material and human. But that sort of desire to draw a sharp distinction between the messy embodied and the digital or the spiritual realm is a very ancient historical heresy. It's a Christian heresy. To think that one is pure and one is dirty, and we're aiming to get from one to the other. The Christian theology, mainstream Christian theology, is that the created world is good. God looked at it and said it's good. So this fantasy that you can live on after death in the in the virtual world, that you can kind of transcend your body through technologies to become immortal. How much more blatant does this stuff need to be? I think the extremes of it are actually a very old Christian heresy being repurposed. But all those nice Catholics, going to church via Zoom during the pandemic, clearly they're not a part of this gigantic heresy. Clearly there are, constructive uses of this, but at the same time, they are changing. The way we are. Is there something different about the communion that we have? If it's if I can smell the person next to me and they're annoying me by sniffing versus if we're all on Zoom. So there's a lot of really interesting work happening about this. Yeah.
So that's a great place to stop. Thank you so much, Professor Sleigh, for joining us on Phil-Sci-Theo and bringing your wisdom, expertise. It's been great having you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.